A rifle shot cracked the stillness of the Arizona desert, sending a flock of startled birds into the crimson sky as Yates Thornton halted his Mustang atop the rocky ridge. The year was 1873, and the setting sun cast long shadows across the unforgiving landscape that had been his home for the past decade. At 32, Yates had seen more than his share of the brutality that defined the frontier, but nothing could have prepared him for what lay in the shallow canyon below. A small Camp 3 covered wagons, a handful of men, and what appeared to be cargo crates occupied the dry creek bed. But it wasn't the camp that caught his attention. It was the young woman sitting in the dirt, her wrists and ankles bound in iron chains, her dark hair falling across her face as she stared defiantly at her captors. Yates removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow as he assessed the situation. The woman was Apache. That much was clear from her clothing, though it was torn and soiled. He counted 6 men, rough-looking types he recognized as bounty hunters who operated along the border. They were a notorious lot, dealing in all manner of illegal trade, including the capture and sale of Apache women to brothels in Mexico. The thought turned his stomach. Yates had no love for the Apache, who had raided many a settlement and stagecoach in the territory. But in his years working cattle and occasionally scouting for the cavalry, he'd developed a grudging respect for them, and he'd never been able to stomach the sight of a person in chains. "What do you think, Shadow?" he whispered to his horse, a midnight black Mustang that had been his faithful companion for 7 years. "Looks like trouble down there." The horse nickered softly in response, pawing at the ground. Darkness would fall soon. Yates decided to make camp in a sheltered spot and watch the bounty hunters through the night. Whatever they were planning, he intended to find out and perhaps do something about the woman in chains. As night settled over the desert, Yates kept his small fire low, eating a cold supper of jerky and hardtack. Through his spyglass, he observed the camp below. The men drank liberally from bottles of whiskey, their laughter carrying on the night air. The Apache woman remained where she had been, though they had thrown a blanket at her. She sat perfectly still, her back straight despite her chains, watching her captors with calculated patience. There was something in her bearing that spoke of uncommon strength. Most captives he'd seen over the years appeared defeated, broken by their circumstances. This woman seemed to be waiting like a mountain lion before it strikes. Morning came with the harsh light of the desert sun. Yates watched as the bounty hunters packed their camp, roughly hauling the woman to her feet. She stumbled once, and one of the men struck her across the face. Even from his position on the ridge, Yates could see her expression never changed, not a flinch, not a sound. His decision made itself. 10 years ago, he might have ridden on, telling himself it wasn't his business. But the war had changed him. 5 years fighting for the Union had left him with the conviction that no person should be enslaved by another. Yates checked his Winchester rifle and the Colt revolver at his hip. He wouldn't be able to take 6 men in a straight fight, but he had surprise on his side and years of experience surviving in this unforgiving country. He waited until the bounty hunters had loaded their wagons and were preparing to move out. The Apache woman had been placed in the back of the last wagon, her chains secured to an iron ring. Yates led Shadow down a hidden trail to a position ahead of the wagon train, where the path narrowed between 2 large boulders. As the first wagon approached, Yates took aim at a pile of dry brush he'd prepared near the path and fired. The brush ignited instantly, sending flames and smoke across the trail. The horses pulling the lead wagon reared in panic, nearly overturning the vehicle. Chaos erupted as the bounty hunters scrambled for their weapons, shouting to each other in confusion. Yates had already moved to a new position, firing again to scatter the horses of the second wagon. In the ensuing confusion, he made his way to the rear wagon. The Apache woman's eyes widened slightly as he appeared beside the wagon, but she showed no fear, only cautious assessment. "I'm getting you out of here," Yates said in a low voice as he worked to detach her chains from the wagon. The woman's dark eyes studied him intently. "Why?" she asked in accented but clear English. Before he could answer, a bullet splintered the wood beside his head. Yates returned fire, striking one of the bounty hunters in the shoulder. "No time to explain," he muttered, finally freeing her chains from the wagon. Though he couldn't remove the manacles from her wrists and ankles, at least she was no longer tethered to the vehicle. Yates whistled sharply, and Shadow came trotting around the far boulder. In one fluid motion, he lifted the woman onto the horse's back, then swung up behind her. "Hold on," he ordered, wheeling the horse around as bullets kicked up dust at their feet. They thundered away from the camp, the sound of gunfire fading behind them. Yates pushed Shadow hard, knowing the bounty hunters would pursue them as soon as they regained control of their horses and wagons. They rode for nearly an hour before Yates felt safe enough to slow their pace. The woman had remained silent throughout their escape, her back rigid against his chest. "We'll stop at the next creek," he said. "Need to water the horse and see about those chains." When they reached a small stream cutting through the rocks, Yates helped her down. Up close, he could see she was perhaps 20 years old, with features that would have been striking if not for the dirt and dried blood on her face. "My name is Yates Thornton," he said as he filled his canteen. The woman accepted the water he offered, drinking deeply before responding. "I am Jerika Howahkan. You speak English well." "My father believed it necessary to understand the language of our enemies," she replied, her voice carrying neither hatred nor gratitude. Yates nodded, then reached for his saddlebag. "Let me see what I can do about those chains." He examined the manacles. They were government issue, probably stolen from an army supply wagon. The locks were simple, and with some effort and the tools from his pack, he managed to remove them from her wrists and ankles. The skin beneath was raw and bleeding. "I have some salve," he said, offering her a small tin. Jerika took it, applying the medicine to her wounds with careful movements. "Why did you help me?" she asked again. Yates sat back on his heels, considering his answer. "No one deserves to be in chains," he said finally. "And those men, they weren't taking you to any place good." "They killed my brother," she said, her voice flat. "3 days ago when they took me from our hunting camp." Yates cursed under his breath. "I'm sorry." "Where will you take me now?" she asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. "Wherever you want to go," he answered honestly. "You'll ride free with me from now on until you decide otherwise." Something in Jerika's expression shifted, not quite trust, but a slight easing of her wariness. "My people camp near Spirit Mountain, 2 days' ride from here." Yates nodded. "Then that's where we'll go, but we should move. Those bounty hunters won't give up easily." As they prepared to leave, Jerika turned to him. "They will follow our trail." "I know. I've got some ideas about that." They rode west, toward a region Yates knew well from his cattle-driving days. By midday, they reached a rocky plateau where the ground was too hard to leave clear tracks. There, Yates led them in circles and false trails before heading north, away from their true destination. "You know this land," Jerika observed as they paused to rest the horse. 10 years in Arizona territory teaches a man a few things," he replied. "Spent time scouting for the cavalry too before I went back to running cattle." "You are a rancher," Yates smiled slightly. "Not exactly. I drive herds for the big outfits, take odd jobs when they come. Been on my own since the war ended." Jerika's eyes showed a flicker of interest. The war between the white men. That's right, fought for the Union, the North, against slavery, she said, making it half a question. Yes, Yates replied, surprised at her knowledge. Among other things. They continued their journey, making camp that night in a sheltered canyon. As Yates built a small fire, he noticed Jerika watching him with an appraising gaze. Your people, he ventured. Will they welcome a white man bringing you back? Jerika's expression turned complex. My father is a respected medicine man. He has some influence. But there are others who trust no white man. Can't say I blame them, Yates admitted. They ate a sparse meal of jerky and dried fruit from his provisions. As the fire burned low, Jerika spoke again, her voice softer than before. You did not have to risk your life for me, she said. Those men could have killed you. Yates stared into the embers. I've seen enough killing to last several lifetimes. Couldn't just ride away. You have kind eyes, she observed unexpectedly. Sad but kind. The comment caught him off guard, and he found himself momentarily at a loss for words. Get some rest, he finally said. I'll take first watch. In the morning, they continued their journey, but Yates grew increasingly concerned about their pursuers. By midday, he spotted dust on the horizon behind them. They're following, he told Jerika, and gaining. Her face remained impassive, but her hands tightened on the saddle horn. There is a place nearby sacred caves where my people sometimes shelter. We could hide there. Under her direction, they veered east, toward a series of red rock formations that rose from the desert floor like the spines of some ancient beast. The terrain became increasingly difficult, forcing them to dismount and lead Shadow through narrow passages. There, Jerika pointed to a nearly invisible crack in the rock face. They squeezed through the opening, finding themselves in a cool, dim cave. Light filtered in from unseen openings high above, illuminating ancient pictographs on the walls. We will be safe here, Jerika said. The entrance is difficult to see unless you know where to look. Yates unsaddled Shadow, giving the tired horse a much-needed rest. As he worked, he became aware of Jerika studying the pictographs. My ancestors drew these, she explained when she noticed his interest. They tell the story of our people and warn of dangers to come. What kind of dangers? Yates asked, moving closer to examine the faded images. War, disease, the coming of the white man. Her voice held no accusation, merely stating facts. And did they tell how it would end? He asked quietly. Jerika traced a faint symbol with her fingertip. They say the world is always changing, always becoming. Nothing ends, it transforms. The philosophical turn of the conversation surprised Yates. In his experience, most white men saw the Apache as savages, and many Apache viewed whites as nothing but invaders to be resisted. This woman seemed to inhabit a different space altogether. They remained in the cave through the afternoon, listening for any sign of their pursuers. As daylight began to fade, Yates ventured to the entrance, returning with news that he'd seen no sign of the bounty hunters. They may have lost our trail in the rocks, he suggested, though he didn't entirely believe it. They ate sparingly of their dwindling provisions, knowing they would need to hunt or find a settlement if their journey extended beyond another day. As night fell, the temperature in the desert dropped sharply. Yates offered Jerika his blanket, but she refused. We will both be cold if we use only one, she said practically. It is better to share warmth. The suggestion made sense, but Yates found himself uncharacteristically hesitant. It had been a long time since he'd been in close proximity to a woman, especially one as proud and beautiful as Jerika. They sat with their backs against the cave wall, the blanket wrapped around both of them. Despite his initial discomfort, Yates found himself relaxing as Jerika began to speak of her people, their traditions, and her life before capture. My father taught me to read and write English, she explained. He traded with a missionary for books. He believes knowledge is the strongest weapon. Sounds like a wise man, Yates commented. He sent my brother and me to hunt alone to test our skills. That is when the bounty hunters found us. Her voice tightened. My brother fought bravely, but there were too many. I'm sorry, Yates said again, feeling the inadequacy of the words. Jerika turned to look at him, her face close to his in the darkness. Why do you live alone, Yates Thornton? You have no wife, no family. The direct question caught him by surprise. Had a family once, parents, younger sister. They died of fever while I was away fighting. After that, he shrugged. Never seemed to find a place that felt like home again. So you wander. I suppose I do. They fell silent, the only sound the occasional shifting of the horse and the distant cry of a coyote. We should try to sleep, Yates finally said. Still have a long ride tomorrow. In the morning they set out again, making good time across the desert. Yates remained vigilant, frequently checking their back trail, but saw no sign of pursuit. By midday, they had reached a series of low hills that Jerika said marked the boundary of her people's territory. We should be cautious, she warned. My people may have sentries posted. Sure enough, they had ridden less than an hour into the hills when Yates sensed they were being watched. He kept his hands visible and their pace steady. Tell them who we are, he said quietly to Jerika. She called out in her native language, her voice echoing among the rocks. For a moment, there was no response. Then, as if materializing from the landscape itself, 3 Apache warriors appeared on horseback, rifles aimed at Yates. Jerika spoke rapidly to them, occasionally gesturing toward Yates. The warriors' expressions remained impassive, but after a brief discussion, they lowered their weapons and motioned for them to follow. They will take us to the camp, Jerika explained. They are surprised to see me and more surprised that a white man brought me home. The Apache camp was well hidden in a valley protected by steep cliffs on 3 sides. As they rode in, people emerged from brush shelters, their expressions transforming from suspicion to astonishment at the sight of Jerika. An older man stepped forward, his face lined with age and wisdom. When he saw Jerika, his stoic demeanor broke and he rushed forward to embrace her. My father, Jerika explained as she dismounted. Yates remained on his horse, acutely aware of the hostile stares directed his way. He had entered the heart of Apache territory, a place few white men had seen and lived to tell about it. Jerika spoke at length with her father, who occasionally glanced at Yates with an unreadable expression. Finally, he approached, looking up at the cowboy with keen, assessing eyes. My daughter says you freed her from men who would have sold her like cattle, he said in clear, precise English, that you fought for her when you had no reason to involve yourself. Yates removed his hat respectfully. She needed help. I was there. The older man studied him for a long moment. I am Jerika Howahkan. My daughter's life is beyond value to me. You will be welcome in our camp. It wasn't until Yates dismounted that he noticed the fresh blood staining his shirt, a bullet wound he hadn't even felt during their escape, had reopened during the ride. You are injured, Jerika said, concern evident in her voice. It's nothing, he began, but the world suddenly tilted sideways, and he found himself kneeling in the dirt, one hand braced against the ground. Jerika spoke sharply, and 2 young men came forward to help Yates to a shelter. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was Jerika's worried face above him. He awoke to the smell of unfamiliar herbs and the soft sound of singing. Opening his eyes, he found himself lying on a bed of furs inside a brush shelter. Jerika sat nearby, grinding something in a small stone bowl. You did not tell me you were shot, she said without looking up. Honestly didn't realize it until we got here, Yates admitted, wincing as he tried to sit up. "Guess I was a bit distracted. My father has treated your wound." The bullet passed through cleanly. She moved to his side, offering him a cup of strong-smelling liquid. "Drink this. It will help with the pain." Yates hesitated only briefly before drinking the bitter concoction. "How long was I unconscious?" "Since yesterday. It is now midday." Yates processed this information with concern. Those bounty hunters could still be tracking us. "Our warriors found their trail," Jerika said. "They were turning back toward the border when last seen. Perhaps they decided you were too much trouble." "Or they're going for reinforcements," Yates muttered. "Rest," Jerika instructed. "You cannot ride yet anyway." Over the next 3 days, Yates regained his strength under the care of Jerika and her father. Despite the initial wariness of the tribe, his status as Jerika's rescuer earned him a measure of respect. Children in particular seemed fascinated by the tall white man with the black Mustang, often bringing him small gifts of polished stones or interestingly shaped sticks. On the 4th day, Yates was sitting outside the shelter watching the daily activities of the camp when Nako approached him. "You heal quickly," the older man observed, lowering himself to sit beside Yates. "Had good care," Yates replied. "I'm grateful." Nako nodded thoughtfully. "My daughter tells me you fought in your people's great war." "I did. Lost a lot of friends. Lost part of myself too, I think." "War changes a man," Nako agreed. "It can hollow him out like water-carved stone." They sat in companionable silence for a while before Nako spoke again. "You could stay longer, until you are fully healed." Yates considered the offer. His original plan had been to leave as soon as he was able, continuing his solitary journey as he had for years. But something about this place, or perhaps someone, made him hesitate. "I'd like that," he said finally. "If you're sure I'm welcome." "You saved my daughter," Nako said simply. "That makes you family." In the days that followed, Yates immersed himself in the life of the camp. He helped repair shelters, joined hunting parties, and shared stories around evening fires. Jerika often served as his guide and interpreter, explaining customs and beliefs that would otherwise have remained mysterious to him. One evening, as they walked along the small stream that provided water for the camp, Jerika asked a question that had clearly been on her mind. "Will you return to your people when you leave here?" Yates skipped a stone across the water, watching it bounce 4 times before sinking. "Don't really have my people anymore. Most folks I knew from before the war are gone or scattered." "So you will continue to wander," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "I've been thinking about that," he admitted. "Maybe it's time to stop running from place to place, maybe find somewhere to build something lasting." Jerika bent to pick up a stone of her own, testing its weight in her palm. "And where would that be?" "I don't know yet," he said, watching her profile in the fading light. "But I'm starting to get some ideas." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the camp. They hurried back to find a wounded warrior being tended to, blood seeping from a gunshot wound in his leg. "Border raiders," Nako explained grimly as they approached. "A large party heading this way." "The bounty hunters," Yates guessed. "They must have gathered more men." "Our scouts count 15 riders," Nako confirmed. "They will reach the valley by morning." The camp erupted into organized activity as people began packing essential items and preparing to move to more defensible positions. "Your people should go," Yates told Nako. "I can stay behind, try to lead them away." "No," Jerika interjected firmly. "They are coming because of me, because they want revenge on both of us." "All the more reason for your people to avoid this fight," Yates argued. "It's not their battle." Nako looked between them, his expression grave. "It became our battle when they wounded our warrior. We do not abandon our own, and now that includes you, Yates Thornton." Throughout the night, the Apache made preparations. Women and children were sent to caves high in the cliffs, while warriors positioned themselves among the rocks overlooking the valley entrance. Yates, despite protests that his wound was not fully healed, insisted on joining them. As dawn broke, Jerika found him checking his rifle on a ledge overlooking the valley approach. "You should be with the others in the caves," he told her when she sat beside him. "I am a daughter of my people," she replied with quiet dignity. "I can fight as well as any warrior." Yates couldn't help but smile. "I believe that. Besides," she added, her voice softening, "I would not leave you to face them alone." Before he could respond, a lookout signaled the approach of riders. Yates peered through his spyglass, confirming his suspicions. The group was led by the same bounty hunters they had escaped from, now joined by what appeared to be Mexican bandits and a few white desperados. "They're coming in fast," he observed, not expecting resistance. The Apache warriors remained perfectly still as the riders entered the valley, passing beneath their hidden positions. When the last rider cleared the narrow entrance, Nako gave a signal, and the first volley of shots rang out. 3 raiders fell immediately. The others scattered, seeking cover and returning fire wildly at the unseen attackers. Yates took careful aim at one of the original bounty hunters, squeezing the trigger and watching the man tumble from his saddle. The battle was brief but intense. Caught in the open and surrounded on 3 sides, the raiders had little chance. Those who survived the initial ambush quickly surrendered or fled back the way they had come. When it was over, 5 raiders lay dead, 3 were wounded, and the rest had retreated. The Apache had suffered only minor injuries. As Yates climbed down from his position, he found Jerika waiting for him, her rifle still warm in her hands. "It's over," he said. "At least for now." She nodded, relief evident in her eyes. "You fought well. My people noticed." "So did you," he replied, newfound admiration in his voice. That evening, the tribe celebrated their victory with music and dancing around a large fire. Yates sat with Nako, watching as young warriors reenacted moments from the battle. "What will you do now?" the older man asked. Yates watched Jerika across the fire, laughing with several children who were crowded around her. "I've been thinking about finding a place to settle, maybe near the border of your territory, if that wouldn't cause problems." Nako followed his gaze to his daughter. "You care for her," he observed. "I do," Yates admitted, "more than I expected to. And she for you, I think." Nako took a thoughtful sip from his cup. "It would not be an easy path. Both our peoples would question such a union." "I'm used to difficult paths," Yates said. "Yes, I believe you are." Nako placed a hand on Yates's shoulder. "Speak to her. The choice must be hers." Later that night, when the celebration had died down, Yates found Jerika sitting alone by the stream, her face tilted up to the star-filled sky. "May I join you?" he asked. She nodded, making room for him on the flat rock where she sat. "Your father and I had an interesting conversation," he began. "Oh." There was a hint of amusement in her voice. "I told him I was thinking of settling nearby. He seemed to think you might have some opinions on the matter." Jerika turned to face him, her expression serious but her eyes soft in the moonlight. "And do you care what my opinions might be?" "Very much," Yates said quietly. She was silent for a long moment before speaking. "When you found me in chains, you said I would ride free with you from now on. Did you mean those words?" "Everyone," he assured her. "Then I would choose to continue riding with you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Whether that means settling near my people or finding a new place altogether." Yates reached for her hand, his heart pounding as if he were facing down a dozen raiders instead of sitting beside this remarkable woman. "I've been alone a long time, Jerika. Never thought I'd find someone who made me want to stop wandering. And I never thought I would find freedom in the arms of a white man, she replied, a small smile playing at her lips. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, she met him halfway, her lips soft against his in a kiss that felt like coming home after years of drifting. When they returned to the camp, hand in hand, Nako was waiting. His smile told them he had anticipated this outcome. The path ahead will not be easy, he reminded them. There will be those on both sides who disapprove. We know, Jerika said, her fingers tightening around Yates's, but we'll face it together, Yates added. In the spring of 1874, Yates built a cabin on a piece of land where a clear stream met the grassland, just a half-day's ride from the Apache camp. He and Jerika were married twice, once in an Apache ceremony blessed by Nako, and once by a sympathetic circuit preacher who didn't ask too many questions. Their home became a unique meeting place, a neutral ground where Apache and white settlers occasionally traded goods and stories. It wasn't always peaceful. There were threats from both sides, nights when Yates stood guard with his rifle, days when Jerika faced scorn in the small trading post 20 miles away. But there was love too deep and abiding, forged in the crucible of their unlikely meeting and tempered by the challenges they faced together. And in time, there were children, a son with his father's height and his mother's keen eyes, and a daughter who could ride like the wind and recite both Shakespeare and Apache legends with equal passion. On summer evenings, they would sit outside their cabin, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson. Sometimes, Yates would take out the manacles he had removed from Jerika's wrists that first day, now kept as a reminder of how they found each other. You ever regret it? He asked her once as their children played nearby and Shadow, now an elderly horse, grazed contentedly in the small paddock. Regret what? Jerika asked, though she knew what he meant. Choosing this life. It hasn't always been easy. She took his hand, running her thumb over the calluses earned from years of hard work. The best trails are never the easiest, she said, but they lead to the most beautiful views. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Yates pulled her close, marveling at how a single moment of decision to help a woman in chains had changed the course of his life so completely. I love you, he whispered against her hair. And I you, she replied, as she had countless times before. Now and always, my cowboy who set me free.